Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development. I'm Uli Vogel, founder of Profiling Values. Here, we focus on values that make a difference for a more human workplace. A warm welcome to the very first episode of the Profiling Values podcast. What's it all about? What's the title? Intuition and Reason in Decision-Making for Recruiting. So, it's about identifying potential risks and, of course, managing them as well. Because when it comes to intuition in business decisions, that's where opinions really differ. Of course, intuition plays an important role in selecting candidates. Sometimes, our gut feeling tells us more than all the other information combined. That's what many leaders say, but the dangers of this mindset are often truly overlooked. Let me start with Daniel Kahneman, a very, very famous Israeli-American psychologist who has repeatedly expressed his critical stance towards intuitive decisions. For example, in one study, he compared 200 studies that looked at clinical predictions based on subjective impressions and statistical predictions. That was what it included. And in only about 60% of these studies, the algorithms proved to be significantly more accurate than human intuition. So, we already have clear evidence there. Despite these findings, you still see it again and again in the business world. I've seen it myself over the decades. Having seen the inside of over 300 companies, I can say that even now, people still often rely on gut feeling. According to a market research survey conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers, I think it was 1,100 executives worldwide, about two-thirds of CEOs firmly believed that big data is changing the way decisions are made. On the other hand, though, 30% of these business leaders still trusted their intuition and experienced more than hard numbers when it came to important strategic decisions. So, you can see there's a lot going on here. I'll break this down into 3 points and then give a conclusion afterwards. Why is it so difficult for executives to strike the right balance with intuition here? For example, a typical CEO problem is that they tend to recruit people around them who are similar to themselves. First, why is it so difficult for executives? Second, I'll talk about 3 classic risks. And then, as a result, how you can minimize those risks. And then I'll look at possible solutions. How can I support you in getting this into the right balance? And of course, I'll also draw a conclusion. So, why is it so difficult for executives? The hurdles for executives in this context: yes, decisions in the hiring process are often influenced by personal likability. Shared interests, backgrounds, and social connections play a significant role. Even though we feel confident that we don't have any biases, these always exist implicitly, no matter what. In the end, we choose the applicant who seems the most likable to us. And that's just something that's deeply rooted in people. That's why, for the second point, we need to take a look at what dangers are involved here, specifically so we can differentiate a bit. I'll pick out 3 points. First, the neglect of relevant information. Because when we make decisions based on intuition, there's a risk that we'll overlook important information, like the person's actual talents, their work habits, attitudes, professional skills, experience, and so on. We might not take these into account enough. And gut feeling alone definitely can't capture all the relevant aspects. Second point, potential disadvantage. Intuitive decisions can simply lead to discrimination, since they're based on individual characteristics that might have nothing at all to do with suitability for the position. And then, of course, diversity and equal opportunity can really fall by the wayside. And third point, highlighted here, inconsistency and unfairness. Because making intuitive decisions can really lead to inconsistencies in the selection process and give the impression of unfairness. That's because the criteria are then subjective, hard to understand, and not comparable. And it can also undermine the trust of applicants and employees in the decision-making process. So, IT is really important. Summary. In other words, it's crucial to recognize the potential dangers of gut decisions in the hiring process and to find solutions to minimize these risks. Because it's always there, kind of bubbling under the surface, and we're not really aware of just how much actually happens intuitively. And we need to become aware of that. As you've probably realized by now, it really isn't a good idea to rely solely on your gut feeling during the selection process. To just trust your instincts. But, and this is the solution, there are, of course, some tried and true steps you can take to make well-founded decisions. So, here's the third point, solutions for this issue. I'll go over 5 possible ways here, so you can make more balanced decisions when it comes to filling positions or selecting personnel. That's the goal. So, first of the 5 points, awareness and self-reflection. It's simply important to be aware of your own preferences, biases, and thought patterns because they quite simply influence your decision-making. So, put everything that matters to you on the table. For example, what really matters to me is value, freedom, creativity, and not being stuck in routine all the time. Emotionality is important to me. And then, of course, it can happen pretty quickly that if I don't feel these values are reflected back to me in an applicant, I might instinctively devalue them a bit. And yes, our gut is like a second brain, and we have to be careful that it doesn't trick us because it tends to anticipate things before we're even consciously aware of them. So, take your time. Take the time to recognize your own values and also to question them. Reflect on how they influence your perception and evaluation of applicants. So, take a look at your own biases and see how you can actively counteract them so you can make more objective decisions. Here's a good trick. One thing my first trainer taught me was, if you get a first impression leaning one way or another, try to consciously disprove it. So, try to ask yourself if you can actually come to a different conclusion. So that means you can set aside or even disprove that first impression you have about something. The second point here for the solution is to define clear criteria. It's just helpful if you set clear evaluation criteria for making decisions when filling a position, and these should really be based on the specific requirements of the situation. When it comes to selection, for example, it could be certain skills, experience, qualifications, cultural fit, and so on. And when you set such criteria, the decision becomes more transparent. And it makes it possible to make a targeted comparison between the applicants as well. In my last book, which I published, Key Factor, Value-Based Leadership, you can find it everywhere online and also buy it. I showed a simple requirements profile function in which you can define and operationalize such criteria, which basically means making them truly measurable. So, the third solution point is to introduce structured interviews and evaluations. Simply implement standardized technologies. Interview questions and evaluation grids are also related to a requirements profile, but the point is to ask questions that contribute to ensuring a more consistent and fair assessment of the applicants. So that, in the end, all applicants get the same questions. And I'm deliberately saying to answer the core questions because just working through a structured questionnaire, step by step, this question, that question, the next question, and so on, doesn't come across well, since it really needs to be a high-level business conversation. But as a blueprint behind it, you should simply have important questions ready and bring them up at the appropriate moment, then carefully note down the answers so you can compare them afterwards. That way, you become more objective and simply make more well-founded decisions. Fourth point, also important in this context, promoting diversity and inclusion. Make sure that your selection processes take diversity and equal opportunity into account. So, deliberately implement measures to attract a wide variety of applicants. And make sure that, through the way you present yourself, you don't discourage any potential applicants. Discouraged because of, say, any particular characteristics. And of course, by promoting diversity and inclusion, you can create a diverse and inclusive work environment. Yes, that complementarity is strong, and it strengthens the team's and the organization's long-term success. But be careful, diversity and inclusion aren't original core company values. Just because of that, you can't succeed on that alone, but it does create openness and, with that, a possible foundation to bring in everything that exists in terms of human talents and possibilities. And finally, the fifth point, which is often neglected in recruiting and selection, actually involving the team. So, make sure to include your team members in the application process by actively involving them in candidate selection. And the different team members can then contribute their perspectives and opinions. And in this way, any blind spots that you or perhaps those involved in the decision-making process might have are minimized. So, that means involving the team, of course, makes it possible to take multiple areas of expertise and functions into account. This allows you to make more well-founded decisions, and beyond that, when you involve the team, it also creates a sense of shared responsibility and collaboration. And that increases the acceptance and support for a decision that has been made. There's often also this story where people say, well, the boss made that decision, and I wouldn't have hired the person anyway. And then, so to speak, you get rejected by the team's immune system. And of course, you can avoid that here. But be careful, keep things lean, don't blow up the process too much, and don't turn it into a grassroots democracy. Don't do that. Of course, it's important to hear the opinions of the team members. But this isn't about voting, it's about who holds the responsibility for the decision. That lies with you, with Inskala, whoever it may be, with the leader. So, what's my takeaway from all this? From exactly this topic, maybe the first point, point A, being more aware. I have 3 points here about this intuition. It's important to emphasize that having a good gut feeling or intuition alone isn't enough to be an outstanding coach, an outstanding consultant, an outstanding HR professional, an outstanding decision maker, CEO, or leader. The ability is present in each of us and may often be hidden, but through targeted training and conscious practice, this intuitive, gut feeling ability can definitely be developed and improved. And secondly, it's crucial to recognize that intuitive competence has an impact both internally and externally. By paying attention to our unconscious impulses and information, and incorporating them into our work, we're able to operate in a truly multidimensional way. To act. And this intuitive competence allows us to remain capable of taking action, especially in complex situations. So it really is an argument in favor of it, but only when used consciously. And thirdly, you could say that fostering and using our intuitive abilities makes us more effective decision makers. Ultimately, because it gives us a broader perspective and greater ability to act in our work. And my first trainer in management consulting once put it very, very nicely and got straight to the point. When making hiring decisions in personnel selection, never decide based solely on your gut feeling, but also never decide against it. And I think that's actually quite nice. Put in a single sentence, and the conclusion be, so to speak, now, if we look at the tools, at the rational side, how we can best combine them, the intuition with the rational side, maybe just 3 quick points. So, you can and should actually strengthen intuitive competence by using algorithms. And by using personality tests that shed more light on an individual's personality and put their values at the forefront. Because people and personality are, at first, something intangible for us. And that's why your gut feeling starts to kick in, too. Making itself noticeable. but science has now produced a lot of very, very good methods. Profiling values is, of course, one of them, so that these personality traits can be described, represented, and therefore discussed as well. And secondly, these algorithms and tests can help uncover hidden potentials and preferences in a person that they themselves may not have consciously noticed, and perhaps the decision maker hasn't either. By integrating these insights into these conversations, and especially when they're brought into the decision-making process, the decision itself can be made even more targeted and effective. And thirdly, perhaps by drawing on both intuition and data-driven insights in this way, we end up with a holistic approach, yes, really, for decision makers when it comes to filling positions. So, this combination ultimately makes it possible to better address the individual needs and challenges of the company in this role. And in the end, it helps us remain even more capable of taking action in complex situations. So ultimately, the combination of intuitive skills with algorithm-based methods can be a truly powerful mix to support people in their personal development. On the one hand, but also when it comes to making decisions about the fit between a person and a role. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode and for sticking with us right to the end. And I'm already fully immersed in the production of the next episodes, and I'm looking forward to it. And I hope you'll soon be a listener of our podcast, Values in Kisi.